Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NFL Edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the Monday Night Football DFS main slate at DraftKings. Usually we're looking at a showdown slate for these Monday night or primetime games in general, but we have two games, so we're not doing a showdown video today. If you want to apply any of this insight and all that to the showdown slates, the Jags versus Bills and the Commanders versus Bengals, absolutely you can do that. But we're going to just focus on the main slate because, hey, if you got two games, let's play with two games, right? If anything I say here helps you out, give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. Helps me out a lot, lets me know I'm doing something right, and it helps you get alerted to future videos. Yeah, so last week, main slate or this current week still, I guess, main slate for week 3 was okay. I basically broke even. I know Taylor had a nice hit, so he did well. He had some money calls. He had Dak Prescott. We both were very much on Juwan Jennings. The thing that burned me the most was probably chalky Jordan Mason. Just was like, meh. He like 10 fantasy points. Yeah, but we like Darnold. We like Charbonnet. Some of those guys hit. We really did not want to pay up at running back. But I did say if I was going to pay up at running back, Saquon Barkley was my favorite guy to go for. So hopefully you did end up using him if you ended up paying up. So yeah, all right. So it's on to the next one, man. Did not win big for me, anyways, on Sunday, but hopefully you guys found a way to cash. And let's get it tonight. All right. So right away, we're going to break it down by each position because we have two games to work with here. Let's start at quarterback. So Josh Allen is the cash game play, and Josh Allen is just the best overall play. He's got the best projection. He's coming in with the most ownership by far at 43% per Roto Grinders. And that all makes sense. I don't have a problem with that at all. The Jaguars, the best way to get at them so far has been through the air. I think they only rank 11th against fantasy quarterbacks so far through 2 weeks. So I think that's totally fine. This is more of like, if you're going to play Josh Allen, it's more of just like a safety play. The thing is, though, he's going to be really owned, and Joe Burrow has a very similar projection. So I'm going to plant my flag here and say on a 2-game slate, to get everybody you want, I think Joe Burrow is the best play. I don't think he's totally necessary, though, because I did build a lineup that I like quite a bit with Josh Allen. It kind of depends what you want to do at, certain spots. Like at tight end, do you want the so-called safety of somebody like Dalton Kincaid? He's 5.3K. He has not been good through 2 weeks, and this is not a good matchup either. The Bengals rank 2nd against fantasy tight ends so far. So yeah, if you want Kincaid, maybe stack him with Josh Allen, or maybe you just use Kincaid and then you drop down to Joe Burrow. That all depends on how you want to build out your roster. But honestly, so far you can get kind of whatever you want without sacrificing that much. If we actually look in the flex, and I'm building out my dream lineup here, here's the kind of guys I'm probably leaving on the table: Brian Robinson Jr., T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, Zach Moss, Khalil Shakir. So those are the kind of guys that you'd probably be leaving out of your lineup if you want to go up top with guys like Josh Allen, Travis Etienne, and of course Jamar Chase. But dollar for dollar, Joe Burrow is my favorite quarterback play on this slate, but I love him and Josh Allen. I will most likely be splitting my ownership between them kind of 50-50. The only other guy that I'd be looking at is Jaden Daniels. He has not thrown a touchdown pass yet in his rookie season, but obviously there's a first time for everything. It's got a primetime game, big game against the Bengals in Cincinnati tonight. Bengals defense has not been kind to quarterbacks. They literally rank, 5th against quarterbacks in fantasy points allowed per game so far. To be fair, one of those games came against Jacoby Brissett, so take that what you will. I do know the Bengals at 0-2 are going to be very desperate, so I anticipate the Bengals stepping up and having a really good game. And since Daniels has not had a lot of success through the air, I would lean towards not stuffing him in my lineup. So at quarterback, not to completely ignore Trevor Lawrence, but it's not a really good spot. He hasn't looked particularly good. He's the cheapest, so he's a good value, and he does have rushing upside. He just doesn't always, take advantage of his, his athleticism. So as far as price goes, Trevor Lawrence looks appealing, but I would much prefer Jaden Daniels over him because he's a more explosive rusher. And then I would greatly, prefer Joe Burrow over both of them. And then Josh Allen is obviously the ceiling and floor play combined, that if you can get to him safely and you feel good about it, Josh Allen is the number one pure play at quarterback. But for pricing and value, I think Joe Burrow stands out the most. Next up, we have the running back position. Travis Etienne has the best projection. James Cook is right behind him. Zach Moss is third. Zach Moss is a little bit interesting just because he hasn't been that good so far. He should have the benefit of playing ahead. So it's possible we could get the first game where Zach Moss gets a ton of volume. And maybe gets a touchdown too. So he was fine in week 1 of the 14 fantasy points in a really slow-paced slugfest with the Patriots. Then last week against KC, he did have 12 carries, which was more than he had in week 1, but he did not find the end zone, and he only had 1 catch, so he only had 5.7 fantasy points. So I do wonder at some point if they're going to kind of turn to Chase Brown and give him a little bit more volume himself. But as things stand, since they're projected to win, they're favored by a touchdown. I think Zach Moss at 5.6 looks totally fine. Up top, if you want to pay for Etienne and James Cook, that's probably what I'm going to do just because it's not very restrictive. The salary at DraftKings for this 2-game slate is not very restrictive. I don't see a reason not to pay for those 2 guys at this point. James Cook is explosive. He had that 3-touchdown game in his last game. The Jaguars are not like a super scary defense. I think they've ranked pretty well against running backs so far this year. Let's see. They're kind of middle of the pack overall, though. They're not giving up a ton of rushing yards, but the rankings are kind of comparing them to teams that already played 3 weeks too. So it's not great. They haven't across the board. There's not one area against running backs that they've been like truly elite. So I'm not that concerned. So at 6.8K, especially after displaying the ceiling last week, James Cook looks interesting. I will note, if you are going to pay up for Josh Allen, there's probably some negative correlation to a certain degree there. So if Josh Allen's going to bounce back from his 9-point fantasy outing from last week, it's reasonable to expect that James Cook won't get 3 touchdowns again. So whether it's Josh Allen siphoning his touchdown equity in the red zone and him scoring instead of James Cook on the ground, or him just throwing it all over the place against the Jags, then that could diminish my interest in James Cook a little bit. So I definitely would consider splitting up that ownership. So if I'm going to have a lot of Josh Allen lineups, a good portion of them I probably would not have James Cook and just bet on James Cook having an okay game and then hoping one of these kind of lower owned guys ends up popping off. So reason being is James Cook is coming in at almost 62% ownership. Like I said, for good reason. He's one of the top 2 backs on the slate. The matchup isn't as bad as it probably appears, and he displayed a really good ceiling in week 2. So I really like James Cook. I'm going to get a lot of James Cook, but considering the ownership and considering the path to Allen and Cook having really, really good games, good example, James Cook had 28 fantasy points in his last game. Josh Allen had 9, right? So, in week 1, Josh Allen had 32 fantasy points and James Cook had 13. So it seems a little unlikely that they're both going to have ceiling games in the same game. Or if they do, it's just not going to happen all that often. So if you want to bet against that and kind of split that ownership up a little bit, I think that is one strategy we can use, especially with Cook being so owned. If there's one running back that I am going to eat the chalk on, it's going to be Etienne, just because he's got a little bit better of a matchup. The Bills have been second worst against fantasy running backs in points allowed per game. So let's just hope that keeps up and the Jaguars actually feed Etienne. They have not really done that, which is a little bit concerning. They kind of suggested this in the offseason that they're going to pull his touches back and get, Tank Bigsby more involved. They did that in week 1. So far, he has not had more than 13 carries, even though in both games, the Jags were in the game the whole time. So if they're smart, Jacksonville will feed him a little bit more. The good news is he's had 14 and 15 touches, or 14 and 16 touches in both games. So he still has a role. He still has a red zone role too, a touchdown in both games this year. So everything across the board to me looks good for Etienne at 53% ownership. He is the chalky back that I want the most over Cook, but both look really good. Have no problem pairing them at all, especially if you're going Burrow over Josh Allen and banking on another solid Cook game. These other guys look okay. Like, I don't have a problem with Brian Robinson, because so far the Bengals defense has been, displaying a masterclass against the pass. But on the ground, they've given up 250 rushing yards and a touchdown. So, hey, Brian Robinson could get going at 35% ownership. That's not too bad for a 2-game slate. He does have the 4th best projection. On the year, Brian Robinson has, last week, 133 rushing yards. He's had 17 fantasy points in both of his first 2 games. He's even involved as a receiver a little bit. So across the board, Brian Robinson at 5.9, I think you could do worse. The problem with a somewhat chalky Brian Robinson is that they're probably going to be playing from behind. So honestly, if I'm going to play a Commanders running back, it's probably going to be Austin Eckler, unless you think the Commanders are going to come out and really give the Bengals problems and play with a lead. I don't really want to go get Brian Robinson. I would imagine after 2 strong outings, he's probably going to deliver a dud here. So I would pivot to Eckler, who is coming in only about 17% ownership. Not a good projection, but he's not that much less expensive than Brian Robinson, which is a good reason why his ownership is where it's at. People just aren't really accounting for what his role might end up being if this game gets out of control, which I think it will. So I would imagine Eckler plays more snaps and he's going to get more exposure in the passing game. Through the first 2 weeks, his PPR value has allowed him to be solid with 10 and 11 fantasy points. So if I'm right about the game script here, I think Austin Eckler is my RB2. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think you could pick a lot worse plays than Austin Eckler in what should be a positive game script for him. Other guys we can consider. You can Tank Bigsby, I think he's questionable. He missed last week. So not really into him at 5K. If he's in, you can consider him, but I don't really want to do that personally. Chase Brown at 4.5K. I don't know. If you think they're going to give him the ball a little bit more, he had 0 catches last week. That's kind of his bread and butter, getting catches and getting out in space. He has not blown up yet this year through 2 games. He did run well in week 2, 4 carries for 31 yards. It's a 12 yards per carry clip. Just not like a really reliable threat to get a ton of volume or score, but he is explosive. So at 4.5K, if you don't want Eckler and you want to just stack all the top options or something, which by the way, like I said, it's not really hard. You don't have to go to Chase Brown to get different or to do that. But just because he's explosive and he's not going to be owned, I think that is in play. Dearness Johnson had 5 carries for 26 yards last week because Bigsby was out. If Bigsby is out at 4.4K, you can play Dearness Johnson. I think Chase Brown and Dearness Johnson would be more like showdown plays in their respective contests. Same thing with Ray Davis at 4.3. He did have 9 carries last week. He is a red zone possibility as a pivot off of a popular James Cook. The only thing is we don't know what his volume is going to be. We don't know if he's actually going to score a touchdown. And again, I don't think you need to take that punt at running back. I think the running backs in these games are some of the safer options, like Etienne. I think Eckler's a good play. And then obviously Brian Robinson, Zach Moss, James Cook. I think they're all pretty good. And I would prefer playing just 2 running backs on this slate and, sticking with either a guy I feel really good about as far as game script or the guys I just feel have the best floor and ceiling, like guys like Etienne and Cook. So not really seeing anybody else at wide receiver, running back that I really want to punt with. I just think it's getting too cute. I think that's more reserved for showdown slates for me. All right, on to wide receiver we go. So Jamar Chase, this is the Jamar Chase game. Okay, he has been very quiet for 2 weeks. Whether it be rust from like the holdout thing or Joe Burrow not playing well in week 1 or just 2 not so great matchups. Because by the way, the Patriots, they just controlled that game in week 1. They ran all day. They controlled the time of possession. They got to Joe Burrow. They just didn't let anything good happen for the Bengals. So they also didn't have T. Higgins in that game. So Chase did have 6 catches for 62 yards in week 1. And then week 2 didn't get any easier against the Chiefs, 4 catches for 35 yards. So now he gets the Commanders, who I think I noted before, but I'll just remind you once again, they are dead last against fantasy quarterbacks and dead last against fantasy wide receivers. So I think Chase is going to explode. His 78% ownership on a 2-game slate tells you all you need to know. If you're doing showdown contests, he should be very much in the consideration for captain. At the very worst, slide him over to flex and then maybe get different in another way. But on a 2-game slate, I'm eating that chalk all day. Chase is right up there with Etienne and possibly Josh Allen as far as guys that I think, it's just worth paying for. Obviously, if you are eating the chalk with Chase like just about everybody else, you should entertain stacking him with Joe Burrow. But I don't think you have to. I think it's a fine strategy. Like I said, I'm splitting that quarterback ownership for the most part. You can get away with putting Jamar Chase out there and eating that chalk and then still eating the Josh Allen chalk. You don't need to pair him with Joe Burrow by any means. And like I said, salary wise, it's not restrictive. You can do a lot of things and pretty much whatever you want on the slate. And I'll get to it in a little bit. You still do want to find a way to get different though, because obviously Josh Allen, Etienne, Chase, those guys will be owned. And there's nothing wrong with that on a tiny slate like this. You're just going to have to make sure you take educated chances on getting a little bit different. So Chase looks like a smash play. No issues there. Don't need to talk about him anymore. The other play for the Bengals that stands out is obviously T. Higgins. 1 second. T. Higgins looks good. It is his first game back. He was out the first 2 weeks with a hammy issue. He's good price at 5.9K. Don't think we need to take that chance on the guy who's going to be 40% owned in his first game back. He said he's fully ready to go. We've been here before with T. Higgins, though. He's had issues where he's not 100%, and then he says he's 100%, and then he plays like 2 plays, or he's just a decoy, or he gets hurt again. I think Higgins is a fine play. The matchup is sublime. The price is awesome. Joe Burrow is a great guy to stack with. You can absolutely stack T with Burrow or T and Chase with Burrow, or just play Chase and T and then go get Josh Allen. Whatever you want to do, you can do that. I don't think T. Higgins is super necessary. His projection doesn't blow me away. I think this is more of a chase game, and that the ownership probably agrees. Play him if you want. I'll have some exposure, but I don't really think he's an absolute necessity. Especially we want to get different in some ways on this slate. And I think just eating chalk after chalk after chalk is not going to do us any favors. So yeah, I'm pretty split on him. I'll probably half my lineups. I'll have T in there with Burrow, and then the other half not. Moving on, Terry McLaurin. I mean, they'll probably be playing from behind. Scary Terry has not been good on the year. 8 targets last week, so that's encouraging. He had 6 catches, but only 22 yards. 2 catches for 17 yards in week 1. So they're just not going down the field right now. We know he's an explosive player. We know he can get past the defense and tear it up. I don't know if this is the spot to really trust him to do that. It's tough to continue to bet against a talented player, especially when he's like the number 1 option. It's just, I don't know if I trust Jaden Daniels on the road prime time against what has looked like a really good pass defense for Cincinnati. So Terry at 5.7, absolutely in play. He has a ceiling. He is pretty owned though, so I just don't think I'm going to make him a priority. If I get to Terry, if the lineups I punch out have Terry in there quite a bit, I'm okay with it. I just don't think it's a must. I would probably just pivot to T for the most part. If it came down to T versus Terry, I'm probably just pivoting to T. He's gonna be a little bit less owned. He has a better projection. He's just a little bit more expensive. He's got a better ceiling, way better matchup. So yeah. Moving readily along here, Khalil Shakir, good matchup against the Jaguars. Like I said, I love Josh Allen on this slate, as you should. So the thing with the Bills is just like, good luck guessing which guy is going to go off. They just spread the ball around. Last week they did all the damage on the ground. Josh Allen, threw 25 times or something? 19. He had 19 attempts last time, 2 rushing attempts. So they just said, screw it. We're just going to dominate the Dolphins on the ground. And, they had 3 picks on Tua, Cook did all the damage, and Josh Allen just wasn't needed. So could that happen again? Sure. I don't think it will. So like I said, my stance with the Bills is I do like Josh Allen. Probably going to be way underweight on Cook just in general because the ownership. So that means we can take our chances on some of these Bills guys. So Shakir is up there with the guys we want to consider. He has 5 targets last week. He had a touchdown in week 1. So that's 10 plus fantasy points in 2 weeks. So he's got a role. He's just going to be hit or miss. We know he's a big play guy. He's out there for a good amount of time. So I think he's totally fine at 5.5K. I prefer him over Terry McLaurin for sure. Just sticking with the Bills real quick to look at who else we'd want to kind of mix in with Josh Allen. I think Curtis Samuel is still viable at 4.4K. Just don't think that's really the kind of risky, cheap guy we need to go with. I would much prefer going with Keon Coleman. He was not a factor last week, but like I said, they just didn't care. They threw the ball 19 times. How much are you going to feed the ball to a raw rookie receiver when you're not trying to even throw? No catches on 1 target, so his ownership is going to come way down. It is at 26% right now, a little surprising. So I still think that's pretty good for a 2-game slate. If you want to just get cute with it, you can pivot to Curtis Samuel if you want, and hopefully Curtis Samuel does something. I just think Keon Coleman's the better play. 4 catches for 51 yards on 5 targets in week 1. I think he bounces back, and I also think he scores a touchdown. So I like him quite a bit. The other Bills guys, I don't think there's anybody else worth mentioning really. There's Matt Collins at 3.1K, MVS. Those are showdown type guys. I do not want to mess with them on a 2-game slate where the salary just isn't needed. Other options. Christian Kirk has been dreadful so far this year. Same with Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis had 7 targets, 3 catches for 43 yards last week, 3 catches for 62 yards the week before. So he's been better than Christian Kirk. Obviously, there is the revenge factor as he returns home to Buffalo to take on his former Bills team. So I think Gabe Davis is kind of interesting as a punt at 4.2K. He would probably be a very interesting captain play in showdowns. For a 2-game slate, don't think he's totally necessary, but he is in play, carrying ownership at 31%. Don't love that, but I think just, the revenge factor, the fact that they're probably going to be playing from behind, the fact that he has made a couple of plays for the Jags so far, I think Gabe Davis is a fine value at 4.2. Christian Kirk is definitely somebody who we could bank on getting back on track a little bit. The Bills are not the best matchup in the word. They're almost top 10 against the pass on the year, and he's been really bad. 1 catch for 4 yards in week 1, 1 catch for 30 yards in week 1, 1 catch for -1 yards in week 2. So just has not been a factor at all. The Jaguars have been slow to get it going. And if I'm betting on anything in this offense tonight, it's going to be Etienne and the running game, coming to life here a bit. So I think Gabe Davis is probably my preferred play just because he offers major savings and he has, some narratives working in his advantage. And Kirk is fine at 5.2K, just not a very reliable play at all. If I'm actually playing the Jaguars wide receiver, though, with any confidence, it's going to be Brian Thomas Jr. The ownership between him, Kirk, and Gabe Davis is actually split. They're all about 30% owned, and I just think he offers the best ceiling. Not only is he only 4.9K, which makes him cheaper than Christian Kirk, but he's just been the better option through the 2 weeks over both those guys. He's averaged 12.5 or 13 fantasy points across 2 games. He scored a touchdown in week 1, 2 catches for 94 yards with the longest 66 in week 2. So he's not like super involved as far as the volume rate level goes. But he is, probably their best big play guy at this point. And we know he can be a factor in the red zone, and we just know he's probably the most talented receiver they have. If they're smart, they're going to start targeting him a lot more. So I like BTJ quite a bit here at that 4.9K price tag. And if I'm picking one Jacksonville player to go with in the passing game, it's going to be Brian Thomas. For Cincinnati, they're guys that were filling in for T. Higgins are kind of a non-go for me. Andre Iosavis, he was nice last week. We liked him as a value in the main slate. He had 14 fantasy points with 2 touchdowns. His price is good at 4.3K. I think he's more of a showdown play. You can take the punt and everything. I just don't see what the point is with him. With T back, it's going to be more of a concentrated target share with the top 2 guys. Let's see who else really stands out. Nobody else. I think these other guys are kind of more reserved for showdown slates as opposed to a 2-game main slate. You got Zacchaeus for the Commanders, Sammy Brown for the Commanders. There's like really major punts that I'd rather slide in a showdown slate than use in a 2-game main slate. Just don't think they're super, super necessary. Noah Brown was a factor for the Commanders last week, 3 catches for 56 yards. So, if he has a role, he's kind of interesting. But again, these guys are all 3.3K or less. Trent Irwin, Luke McCaffrey. I don't have a lean on any of these guys because they don't have really big roles. McCaffrey had no stats in week 2 after having 3 catches in week 1. So it's just like the Commander situation beyond Terry McLaurin. It's just a big time guessing game. It's a bad matchup on the road. They are not favorites. Their passing game has not been that good, and there's just nobody there that's super reliable. So for the most part, I'm going Bengals passing game, and I'm rotating in the Bills and Jaguars values and seeing where I get. But for the most part, I really like those rookies, Keon and Brian Thomas. Over to tight end we go. Dalton Kincaid has not been good. I was big on Dalton Kincaid before the season started. Loved him for season long. Thought I'd be picking on defenses with him all year in DFS. So far, that has not happened. In week 1, he had 1 catch on 2 targets. Got a little bit more involved last week with 4 catches for 33 yards. That's not going to cut it. At 5.3K, he's the most expensive tight end because, by the way, Evan Ingram is out. So in theory, he offers the best floor and he has a ceiling, but the Jaguars have been really tough on tight ends. They rank number 2 against the tight ends so far on the year. Let me just double check that stat to make sure it's correct. Yep, number 2. It's not been good. 3 catches for 23 yards, no touchdowns. Obviously, that's a very small sample size, so anytime you have that, you could exploit it if the ownership is going to tilt away from him. Let's see where it's at right now. No, so Dalton Kincaid has not been good. It's not a good matchup, and he's going to be really chalky at the position. For what it's worth, I was high on Kincaid before the season started, so I think the ability is there. The role could be there. And he's got the best projection of the slate. So is Kincaid a good play relative to the slate? Absolutely. I think what you do at tight end could start factoring in what you can do elsewhere as far as funds go. So if you pay up for Dalton Kincaid and you pay up for Chase and you pay up for one of the running backs and Josh Allen, then it starts getting a little bit interesting as far as what you're going to do with these value plays. I just think tight end is probably a spot where I'm going to punt. I mean, I don't know. Kincaid has just not been a guy that I can really bank on right now, and especially when it's just not a good matchup. So I'm probably going away from Kincaid, that chalky ownership. That is one way for me to get different. It doesn't feel great because there's not many really good tight ends on the slate, but based on who he's been, they're all kind of the same. Like, he should not be this expensive for who he's been and for what the matchup is. So with that in mind, Zach Ertz and Mike Gesicki do look okay. Their projection is not that far away from Kincaid, and they're way cheaper. They're going to carry a little bit of ownership relative to the slate, but neither of them are even maxing on at 20%. I think Gesicki is a trap, though. He's got a worse matchup than Kincaid. He's facing the number one defense against tight ends, which it's the Commanders, so that could be a little bit noisy. Who knows? But Gesicki had an awesome game last week. T. Higgins is back, though. So he and Andre Iosavis, those guys are going to take a hit. And they're just, Gesicki's just not going to be as reliable. I would not be shocked if he goes. He had 7 catches for 91 yards on 9 targets last week. I think he's going to revert back more to what he was in week 1, which was 3 catches, 4 targets, 18 yards. So that's what I'm thinking. Not super into Gesicki. But, on a 2-game slate at 3.6K, yes, he's in play. Zach Ertz is $100 more. I think he's just a little bit safer than Gesicki. He's basically the second most reliable receiver the Commanders have. The matchup isn't great. The Bengals, like I said, are really, really good against the pass so far this year. They're not quite as good against tight ends as they are against other spots. So I think Zach Ertz is in play just because we know he's going to have a lot of short area looks if the Commanders are struggling, and he still, in theory, could be a red zone presence. 4 targets in each of his first 2 games, 3 and 4 catches in weeks 1 and 2. So I think he's okay. There's not much of a ceiling, but on the slate where tight end is just kind of like, I'm not that worried about it. So I think he's fine. But my favorite play at tight end is actually going to be Brenton Strange. He's going to split the work with Luke Farrell for the Jags, but Strange showed in week 2 that he probably has the better ceiling of the two. He had 3 catches on 6 targets for 65 yards with a long of 30. So obviously the guy can spring it open down the field just a little bit. So I'm interested to see what he can do for my lineup at 2.7K. He's not even coming in with that much ownership at 23%. So I like that a lot. Overall, I think it is between Strange for the ultimate value at 2.7 or Kincaid. I'm going to play it safe with Kincaid at 5.3, or I'm just going to punt tight end and roll with Strange and hope that Kincaid doesn't break the slate. On defense, it's probably just Bengals or Bills. It's a tiny slate. You can totally play the game like, oh, the Bengals are just broken. Commanders are going to come out and somehow shock the world, and at 2.5K, they'll be a great punt. I just don't think that's where we need value. The Jaguars, they are on the road. The Bills offense has been humming. Jacksonville's defense hasn't seemed that great. So they could always rise up in a must-win game and get it done, but just don't see the need here. The Bills and Bengals are favorites, and they're at home. I think they're both going to win these games. But the Bengals are the safest play. At 3.1K, this should be a lot more expensive for this being a 2-game slate. So I think that's a steal. If we want to go look at the ownership real quick, I'm assuming it favors them by quite a bit. So yeah, Bengals and Bills are just the 2 best options. And I just don't think for the risk, just to get like lower owned defenses on this slate, I just don't think the risk really matches the reward on this 2-game slate. All right, ran a bit long, but hey, it's 2 games. It's a little bit longer than a showdown slate normally is. But just a quick recap. At quarterback, it is Josh Allen and Joe Burrow, almost 100% for me. Only guy I'd sprinkle in a little bit is Jane Daniels. Love Etienne. I think James Cook is totally fine. I don't mind playing him, but in my Josh Allen lineups, I probably would have him considerably less. That third running back that I'm looking at is probably going to be Austin Eckler, just because I think the Commander is going to trail, so he should be a little bit more involved than usual. Jamar Chase is a smash play. I'm going to have him in pretty much all my lineups. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. As far as values go, my 2 favorites are going to be Brian Thomas Jr. and Keon Coleman. At tight end, it's Dalton Kincaid or Brenton Strange. I'm favoring Strange there. And then the Bengals are the top defense to own. that does it for me. Hopefully this helps you out a little bit, and hopefully you can also apply some of this to showdown slates if you want to play just the one game format at DraftKings as well. If this helps you, please give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.